Due to an international break, the Premier League is currently on hold after just 4 game weeks. So I thought it'd be a good idea to take some time and rank all the Premier League managers as they currently stand and give my opinion on whether they're in the GOAT conversation or just utterly useless. Before we get into it, comment down below who do you think is the best Premier League manager currently in the Premier League and who do you think is the worst? Who do you think is your favorite as well in terms of like maybe an underrated pick that people kind of tend to gloss over? But before we get into it as well, consider liking the video if you end up enjoying, and let's get right into it. Starting with Rob Edwards. And listen, Rob Edwards managing Luton. How do I say this lightly? I expected more from Luton to start. I thought they'd get at least a point or two more, uh, but they haven't. And they're at the point where I just don't see the philosophy or the in game management that will pay off with Rob Edwards at the wheel. Uh, so I'm going to have to put him at useless. I don't think he's that great. Next up is Paul Heckingbottom. And I I don't know. I feel like he's probably also useless or maybe average, but we'll put him at useless for now. Ange Postecoglou, and this might be kind of like a hot take here, but I'm gonna put him straight into it. Elite. He'll be the first manager in there. So far, from what I've seen, he's been absolutely electric. He got over 100 points for Celtic. He's a manager who has clearly made an impact on both the morale and the tactical approach for Tottenham. And as a whole, I love the way he carries himself. He just seems like a proper manager. He won silverware in Japan. While that might not seem like, the biggest of accomplishments, he did it while, being at the wheel of a club that is part of the city football. He did it while being at the wheel of a club that is part of the city football group, which means that, his talent is there. City Football Group is a very prestigious organization. They pick their managers very carefully. So I I really rate Ange Postecoglou after 4 game weeks. I'd put him at elite, honestly. Um, Next is Vincent Company. And I'm gonna put him at average. You know, to start the season, he has not lived up to expectations whatsoever. He did well in Belgium. He had over 100 points in championship with Burnley, but now Burnley just looks, I don't know, they're like timid and just not cohesive, and they look like a championship team in the Premier League. They look like Burnley of past. And I was expecting, a new Burnley, a re-energized Burnley sort of, but that's not what we're getting. He's playing more like Deitch and less like Pep. So that's why I'm gonna have to put him in at average. I'm gonna put Andoni Iraola in at good. He's got some big wins on his CV in La Liga against Real Madrid and Barcelona. He's impressed me with the talent he's recruited at Bournemouth, and Bournemouth's done decent, I think, to start the season. A tough loss to Liverpool. They had a draw with Brentford. Um, they could be better, but I think overall he is a fairly solid and good manager. Um, Next up is Roy Hodgson, who I'm gonna say he's average too. And some people will say, well, Roy Hodgson, he's old. He's not really like in his prime, so to speak. He's past it. But at the same time, this man who many people have called a dinosaur, he kept Crystal Palace up last season. He had them playing pretty football last season, and they're doing decent to start this season. Obviously, Roy Hodgson as a long-term prospect of a manager isn't the best, and he has a very clear ceiling, but I'd say he's average. He can get a tune out of players. He can come in and kind of stabilize the team if need be. I don't know. I think that's fairly fair for him. Next up is Jurgen Klopp, who's the first one to go into the GOAT conversation. I don't think this needs any explanation on my end. I'm a Liverpool fan, and even without bias, I think even Manchester United fans, Chelsea fans, City fans will recognize Jurgen Klopp amongst this current crop of managers and amongst most managers is one of the GOAT managers of all time. GOAT managers of all time, that's an interesting way of putting it. But he is simply put one of the best managers to ever grace the game and the Premier League. And, I think he's my GOAT, but I think he is in that kind of conversation up there. Next up is Unai Emery. And I'm gonna have to put him at elite as well, ahead of Ange because he has so many Europa League titles and such. But Emery isn't necessarily in the GOAT conversation. I don't think he's won a league title, which, I don't think is a prerequisite, but it definitely helps. He's just about as close to elite uh, as where you could get to GOAT. I think he is just such a talented manager. And even despite, the 3-0 loss to Liverpool, he is still a very classy, confident, and honestly, I think just solid coach, all things considered. Next is Pep, and this should come as no surprise. I think Pep Guardiola is obviously also in the GOAT conversation. I mean, I could sit here and ramble on about all the, accomplishments and trophies and just manager of the month awards that Pep Guardiola has accumulated throughout his career and his time at Man City, and we'd be here for days. So I don't think I need to speak on Pep. I think he speaks for himself, similar to Jurgen Klopp. Uh, but yeah, I think Pep is absolutely elite and probably the best manager of all time, maybe one of the best, if not the best. Uh, and I think he very easily deserves his spot. Eddie Howe, Eddie Howe's good. Eddie Howe can, bring your team up a level, regardless of where that team is. But he does have like a base level. He has some very naive mistakes he makes. His recruitment at Newcastle was very weird this season, I'd say. Um, in some respects, you would say, they're working within their means, but the negligence of, say maybe not signing a center back or maybe not signing higher quality level of player is something that I think Eddie Howe deserves criticism for, as well as his in-game management. He always has like a mistake or two and forgets, he tries to either overcomplicate things or just kind of shuts his brain off, it feels like. But overall, I think he's good. I think he's a good manager, but I think a lot of people will put him in like elite conversations for, what he's done in his career and what he's done at Newcastle over the last like year and a half or so. But for me, I don't know, Eddie Howe overall, he's good, but he will be found out in the Champions League this season very easily. Uh, Next is Mauricio Pochettino, who honestly, I'm gonna have to put him in at good as well. He's, I could I could probably put him at elite, but it feels a little bodacious. I mean, he's done good things with Tottenham in the past. He got them runners up in the Premier League once. He got them to the Champions League final. He won PSG league title. I think that's fair. Out of the current crop, I'm looking at it, and he'll stay here for now unless elite gets a little crowded because I hate to say this, and some people might, you know, roast me in the comments. I think Ange Postecoglou is a better manager than Pochettino. I said it. Pochettino is a very, very decent manager, but he doesn't have the same tactical know-how, it feels like, compared to someone like Ange. It at least to the start of the season, with the way that Chelsea's lined up, the back fives, the weird formations. Obviously, there's an injury crisis at Chelsea to an extent, but Poch hasn't done himself many favors, and the PSG gig is kind of like an autopilot job. He really hasn't been like him since Tottenham. Uh, so I'm gonna keep him in that good, and if elite is a little lacking, we'll move him up. Uh Deitch is useless. Useless. I'm sorry. I can't with good confidence anymore. Even as a Liverpool fan who is like an ardent, ardent hater of Everton. Everton fans, this is not a jab at your football club. This is simply the reality of the facts. There is such a low ceiling when you play the style of football that Dyche plays, specifically when you're managed by Dyche. Burnley did well one season in the Premier League, and then they got relegated the next. Then Dyche was out of a job. He came in and started managing Everton last season, and it wasn't necessarily the best of times either. He barely got him over the line. And to start the season, it's been just absolutely dross. It's been absolutely tepid stuff at Goodison Park. But for me, Dyche is effectively useless. I genuinely think that when you play his style of football for enough seasons in a row, you are bound to get relegated. And I don't think Everton will get relegated this season, but in that context, I think he's useless. Sorry, Sean Dyche. You're like high at like low average is his baseline. So for me, he's useless, but he's at the top of useless. Eric Ten Hag. Eric Ten Hag, I think it's pronounced rather. Ten Hag seems kind of feels a little pointed. Um, he's good. He's not elite. He is good as well. Um, I don't know. I just don't see it with Ten Hag sometimes. Ten Hag will manage one game brilliantly, and the next he will just throw everything out the window. And plus his recruitment and man management's been extremely questionable. For me, the signings that he's made so far, the money that's been spent on Eric Ten Hag's Manchester United, has been absolutely abysmal for the results they've received. You know, they haven't really accomplished much since he's taken over, and it's only been a year, but you can already see like cracks starting to form. You know, Sancho just came out and basically said, you know, that he effectively called Ten Hag a liar by basically rebuking his statement of, you know, the reason why Sancho's not on the team is because he hasn't really been doing too well in training. Stuff like that, it's not what you want to cultivate as a manager from the man management side. And even tactically, as we've seen, he has some moments where he just kind of gets it wrong. I think he's a very good manager. To call him elite, I don't know. Like the money that's been spent, I understand he did it in the Netherlands with Ajax, but he just kind of, I don't know, something about him. He's just missing something, and I can't put my finger on it, but because of that, he's good. Marco Silva, average, very average, probably better than these two, but you know he'll do well, and then like for like a stretch of games, you know, Marco Silva, he'll get 3 or 4 good results, and then it'll be like 10 games where it's very middling. So because of that, he's average. I don't know. He hasn't accomplished much with Fulham. You know, Fulham do look like more of a mainstay now, but I feel like a lot of times it doesn't really come down to his acumen, you know. His acumen is at display. Don't get me wrong. Every manager's acumen is at display when their team is playing, but something about Marco Silva, similar to Ten Hag, it feels like he doesn't have things under control as much as he would like, and as a result, it kind of just shakes things up a bit for him. Thomas Frank, I'd say he's good. I'd put him probably somewhere like this. Yeah, that seems fair. Uh, he's a good manager. He's recruited very intelligently. He's played a number of styles and formations that have suited Brentford throughout the last few seasons with him at the wheel. I do think that at times Thomas Frank does kind of mess it up and overthink things and try to get a little too creative. But all in all, I think he's a fairly good manager. Um, Next up, we have Steve Cooper, who I think he's pretty good. I'm not going to put him above Pochettino or Frank or Areola, but I will put him above Howe. I think he's a better manager than Howe. Um, I'm honestly going to put Eddie Howe down to average. I think at this point, you know, even with some very small portions of Newcastle fans calling for his, him getting sacked or whatever, I think that's a little too much too quick. I still think Howe has some work that he can do at Newcastle, but I think last season was a really good display. But at a point, Newcastle were, they were soaring, and then they almost dropped out of the top 4. So because of that, I can't really put him in this same level. But then you might be like, well, why do you have Steve Cooper at good? Well, so far, Steve Cooper has been doing incredible at Nottingham Forest. And while there was a lot of transfers last year and it kind of seemed a little tough, he managed to keep him up in what a lot of people still thought was a relatively improbable ask. But on top of that, you look at how he's recruited this summer and how they've been playing and just the vision of the club. And I really like what he's doing at Nottingham. He's right at high average, but low good. So we'll keep him at good. Next is the Zerbi. The Zerbi, I think I'm gonna have to put also in good. We're gonna adjust this very shortly. I think he's a very talented manager. I think he's a manager who's, capable of doing a lot of very good things for Brighton. Uh, in the coming seasons, he's done a lot of great things so far. He's started the season very well. Besides that little hiccup with West Ham, those type of games will happen though, and I really rate De Zerbi. I think he's a top class manager. I genuinely, these two specifically, in terms of like if Jurgen was to go tomorrow, which would be one of the worst days of my life, uh, Ange Postecoglou and De Zerbi are like right at the top of that list for Jurgen Klopp replacements at Liverpool. God forbid anything happen to cause him to leave. Next is Arteta. Arteta, I will say, is elite. I think Arteta is probably better than Ange, but not as good as Emery. And this might feel a little, a little like, oh, well, how is that he's, you have Emery at low. Actually, no. Arteta is better than Emery. I got a little ahead of myself. My apologies. But um, I think Arteta is a quality manager. I think his title charge last season was decent but lacking. He's elite because of his ability to the style of football that they play, and when Arsenal is fully firing, is as close to Pep Guardiola ball as you can get without being managed by Pep. So like being that he is like kind of like a Pep Air or like a Pep 1.5, 2.0, whatever you want to call him, I think just because of that and because of how it seems he has a fairly decent hold on the locker room as well. Because of all that, I think he's an elite manager, at least in the context of everyone here. Next is Gary O'Neill, who he's with Wolves. It has Bournemouth here. I'm gonna say he's useless. I really wish Gary O'Neill wasn't useless, but he just is. It's the cold hard truth of it. He's not really that great of a manager. It hasn't really worked at Wolves so far. I don't think he's gonna last much longer in the job. And with Bournemouth last season, they really didn't do too great either. The fact that he had to mutually part with Bournemouth is telling as well. I hate to do this, but he's probably, if I were to have to say it, like the third most useless manager in the league. Uh, and next up is, and finally, I should say, certainly not least, David Moyes. And Moyes, I think Moyes is a good manager, and I'd put Moyes right there. And what I'm gonna do is, I hate to do this, but I'm gonna put Steve Cooper at high average, as well as Andre Iraola, because while I do feel like he is a very good manager, like I still need to see some more from him. I like what I've seen, but I think this is a fair list, given everybody's capabilities, the resources they've had at their disposal, their general track record, and how I think they're going to perform throughout the rest of the season. I'm just going to make some final adjustments in terms of the order, so that's kind of ranked exactly how I want it. This bottom is ranked exactly how I want it. Next up, probably how ahead of Cooper. Well, I'm going to do something like this. Let's do it like this. So Cooper ahead of Iraola. Do I have him ahead of Howe? That's really the question. And I'm just gonna do it for the meme. I got the comedy shirt on. I'm feeling goofy. Uh, Next up, Thomas Frank, fair. Poch, fair. Uh, Moyes, fair. De Zerbi, fair. Ten Hag, fair. And then the elites. Ange, Emery, Arteta, Pep Guardiola, and Jurgen Klopp. That is my list. That is my order. If you disagree on any of them, feel free to sound off in the comment section below. Let me know who your favorite and best manager in the Premier League is, and who do you think is the worst manager in the Premier League. As always, if you'd like the video, consider giving it a like, and consider subscribing to the Sideline Sedo YouTube channel for all your Premier League manager ranking and general football content news right here on the Sideline Sedo YouTube channel. Thank you so much again for watching. I'm Sideline Sedo. Peace.